Welcome to the Maine Spending Plan training. This tutorial provides an overview of the Maine Spending Plan. The Maine Spending Plan tool is intended to be completed by support brokers and members together. Today we'll complete a spending plan and along the way discuss some common questions that arise when completing a spending plan. The workbook does contain a lot of information, but as a support broker and a member, you're only responsible for completing the green cells. The other cells contain information to help you along the way. So both words and formulas. And if I accidentally try to type in those cells, I get an alert letting me know that it's password protected, so I can't accidentally delete information that I shouldn't. There are 3 tabs to the workbook. We have the spending plan, which is the tab we'll complete today. We also have a sample annual spending plan, so you can see what it would look like to have a completed plan. And then we have a reference tab. The reference tab contains minimums for the various rates of services, as well as the minimum wages for the state. Keep in mind, Portland does have a higher minimum wage. The information on the reference tab is completed by the state and is there for your reference only. It automatically gets populated into the spending plan. So you don't have to look at the reference tab, but you can if you are interested. Now let's go back to the spending plan. We're going to just start by providing an overview. At the top, it does say Maine Self-Direction Spending Plan, and it has a field for you to enter the date and the support broker name who's completing the spending plan with the member. At the top is an overview of spending that has some member information, as well as information that's provided by the resource coordinator, and then information that you can use if you are completing more than one spending plan throughout the year. The bottom of section 1 contains a summary of the plan and the total spending for both the flexible spending section as well as the fixed spending section. If we look down, section 2 is the flexible spending, and over on the right-hand side, once this information is populated, we'll see a total flexible spending for this plan. The sections of flexible spending include employee costs, financial management services or FMS fees, support brokerage, workers' compensation, and individual directed goods and services. As we scroll down in the plan, the final section of the plan is section 3, fixed spending, and over on the right-hand side, there's a total fixed spending amount, and the various categories of fixed spending include assisted technology devices, assisted technology transmission, which is the utility service, home accessibility adaptations, repairs and replacements, and home accessibility adaptations. Now let's take a closer look at the spending plan and start completing it. So we'll start with section 1, an overview of spending. The first 2 items are the member's first name and last name. So in this case, Ernie Employer. The next item asks for Ernie's main care ID, which is an 8-digit number, often followed by a T or an A. So I'll enter Ernie's main care ID. Then it asks if Ernie lives in the city of Portland. It's a drop-down menu. Ernie does live in the city of Portland, so the spending plan reminds me that Portland does have a higher minimum wage. Item 5 asked if the spending plan is new or revised. This is a new spending plan, and it asks for the version number. This is version 1. The spending plan start date is January 1st, 2025, and the end date is December 31st, 2025. And as soon as I enter this information, the next 3 items automatically populate with a calculation of the number of days in the spending plan, the number of weeks in the spending plan, and the number of months in the spending plan. So that corresponds with that 1-year total. If for some reason I was creating a spending plan for part of the year, say a member's needs changed, I could update that end date, so 6/30/25, and it automatically calculates for that half year with the total number of months, weeks, and days. But right now we're going to enter a plan for the entire year. Okay, so now we're down to item numbers 9, 10, 11, and 12, which are all provided by the resource coordinator. So the resource coordinator provided the total authorized dollars of service, which are for Ernie are $74,006.40. They also said that there will be 20 hours of home support and 10 hours of community support, and this is for 12 months of services. Now, the next three items have to do with if there's a change in the spending plan throughout the year. So it looks at prior spending that could either be used from a prior plan, say if you had to cut off the spending plan during the year because a member had different needs or desires and the spending plan needed to reflect it. You can use information from a prior plan or from an FMS report. Right now, since there is no prior plan and this is a new plan, we will be entering zero. This is a new plan. So item 13 would be the prior plan goods and services accrual year to date, which currently is zero. Item 13B is the prior plan goods and services spent year to date, also zero. And item 13C is the prior plan total flexible spending, also zero. There is no spending yet. So I've completed the top section of the report, and now it gives me the summary of the plan, so the totals. So it says the first item is total flexible spending, which is a total of any prior plan spending and current spending. And you'll see there's one item included so far for $1,538.16. So we'll look closely at that in a moment. It also says that the funds remaining are $72,468.24. So that's the difference between any flexible spending and the total authorized dollars. Now, if we move on to section 2, over on the right-hand side, it does have a total flexible spending total, and that matches that spent item that we saw over here. So we can scroll down and look at our totals. If we look over here, there's no employee spending yet, but when we get down to the next item, we see that financial management services has a total amount included. It's a monthly fee, and since we're completing a plan for 12 months, it includes 12 months of services. So that is automatically included in the plan so far. Okay. So we'll move on to section 2, flexible spending, and enter some employee information. So the first item says, select the service type for each employee, leave extras blank. So I'm going to select home support, and Ernie's decided that they would like to have 3 employees who provide home support. So we'll complete this for 3 different employees, and it says, will your employee provide both home support and community support? And Ernie received some hours for both home support and community support. So 2 of the employees are going to provide both. So I'll select yes here. And the 3rd employee will only provide home support. Okay, so I entered that information, and you'll notice that the next item here says, here are the minimum and maximum rate per hour you are allowed to pay your employees. So the minimum rate is $15.50, the maximum rate is $31. And those minimum and maximums, they come from the reference tab. So if I enter, say, $13 an hour, it says rate is blank or below the minimum. If I enter $35 an hour, it says rate exceeds maximum allowed. So we're going to do $25 for each of the employees. There are a few reasons why you might not want to just pay the highest. Sometimes a member might want to give raises over time or pay a rate based on the experience their employee has. So they might want to start a little lower and be able to just give raises over time. Any extra money that's accrued can be used for individual directed goods and services. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So next, we'll enter the weekly hours by employee. So employee 1 is going to do 8 hours, and then we have 6 and 6. So we have our 20 hours of weekly home support. Now we'll move on to the next service types. 2 of the employees are providing community support, so we'll select community support, and those minimum and maximum rates appear. For community support, Ernie would like to pay $16.50. I'm entering that. And then the total weekly hours are going to be 5 for each of them. Now, if I entered 8, you'll see that the weekly hours are exceeding the plan by 3 hours. So I'm going to go back and enter 5. If I entered, say, 1, it tells me that the hours are less than planned. So we need to stick with that 5. And that would go through to this as well. So if I entered a 6 here, it's telling me that the hours are less than planned by 2, so I should go back to 8. Okay, so now our hours tie out with our plan. Remember, Ernie was authorized 20 hours of home support and 10 hours of community support. So the next, it helps calculate taxes. So item 21 says, select yes or no. Is there a family relationship between the employee and the employer that meets one of the following criteria? A child under 21 who works for a parent, a spouse who works for a spouse, or a parent works for a child. And so in each of these 3 situations, yes or no, because if they do apply, there are certain additional tax exemptions that apply to that relationship. So the first one is a family relationship. It does apply. The second one does not. And the third one does. There's one more family relationship question. Item 22, select yes or no. Is the employee a child under 18 who is working for a parent? And the first one is no. The second one is no. And the third one is yes. Okay, so if we look at the employee's weekly pay plus the employer taxes, I'm going to just flip this one so you can see the taxes change. If I select no, those taxes go up. If I select yes, they go down. That's why we'll do that down here. You can take a look. Yes, no. So it does make a difference in the tax portion for the spending plan. The fields below it are the employee's weekly pay plus employer taxes. So that's just a nice summary at the bottom. And then followed by employees' wages plus employer taxes for the duration of the spending plan. Remember, we're completing a spending plan for an entire year. So this is what the cost will be for the employees' wages plus the employer taxes for that entire spending plan. So $36,163.91. We move down in flexible spending, we have the FMS cost. That's going to be a set fee per month for the duration of the plan. The next item is support brokerage, which support brokerage can come in 15-minute units. So there is a minimum requirement of 1 15-minute unit annually and a maximum of 200 annually. And so you'll need to enter the number of estimated support brokerage hours. So somebody who's new to the program might need a little more support brokerage hours if they're envisioning there might be some plan changes over time, or they need additional support around hiring employees. That could also be a reason to have additional support brokerage. We can start with, say, for planning purposes, 16 15-minute units a month. So this is going to calculate out and we get $3,346 annually. Workers' compensation is the next item in flexible spending, and that is provided by the FMS. We can use an approximate of $680 right now, and then we'll move on to individual directed goods and services, item number 25. Individual directed goods and services are accrued or built up over time based on the actual employee hours worked, not based on the planned hours, but the actual hours. We all know that life happens and plans change and sometimes employees don't show up. So that accrual and the amount available for individual directed goods and services is based on actual employee working hours. It's also going to depend on the rates paid to an employee. So a higher rate means less money goes towards goods and services. Lower rate means more money could be available. So this is important to keep in mind when things like overtime happen. There is less money available for individual directed goods and services. This is all going to be more noticeable if you have a small amount of employee hours versus a large amount of employee hours to work for the year. So all things to keep in mind when planning out your individual directed goods and services. So Ernie and I have come up with a plan for the year. So I'm just going to enter that information. So Ernie has horseback riding, a gym membership, community involvement, mileage reimbursement, and then a health insurance stipend. So when I entered all that information, we have our total goods and services plan spending as being $5,345. We have $0 spent from a prior plan. This is a new plan, so we don't anticipate anything being included. And then we have our current spent value as being that 5,345. And you can see that total spending for the current plan at the bottom. If this was a continuation of a prior plan from the year, and I did have information in the prior field, so if I just change this health insurance stipend from being a current expense to a prior expense, you can see how that goods and services spent from the FMS or a prior plan will get populated right here. And the current spend goes down by 1,000. If you obtain spending information from an FMS and wanted to include it in a plan, if for some reason you are creating a plan throughout the year, remember we did have $1,000 at the bottom. If we learned that instead of being 1,000, it was actually 995, I could enter that information here, and the goods and services spent from the FMS or the prior plan is going to populate with the more accurate spending information that was obtained from the FMS. So that's just another way to look at it for planning purposes. So we have these items that would be added to future plans if for some reason there's a change in the member's plan for the year. So we have a goods and services accrual year to date, and in this case it's $10,000, and a goods and services spent year to date, and currently that matches that $5,345. So both of these items could be added to a future plan if it was cut off and needed to be rolled over for any reason into items 13 and 13B. We have our goods and services total right here. And before I'm done with my flexible spending, what I want to do is look up at the top, and I want to make sure that my funds remaining are not greater than my flexible spending, that there are no red error message anywhere, and everything looks good. So that part looks great. And we can move down to section 3, fixed spending. So this brings us to the final section, section 3, fixed spending. So there are 4 different components to fixed spending: the assisted technology devices, assisted technology transmission, home accessibility adaptations, repairs and replacements, and home accessibility adaptation. So these are items 26 through 29. We can see the total fixed spending as we're going to populate it over on the right-hand side. Each of these has a different maximum. So assisted technology devices has a maximum per year. Assisted technology transmission has a maximum amount per month, and home accessibility adaptations, repairs and replacements has an amount per year. And then home accessibility adaptations have a higher amount over a 5-year period of time. So we're creating an annual plan. So we can go to the first item, and I actually have a little list over here that based on my earlier discussions with Ernie. So I'm going to enter the information that Ernie decided to purchase with the assisted technology devices funds. So we have a talk box, we have a personal emergency response system, some hearing aids, and some adaptive computer equipment. In the description field, I'm going to include any information that's going to help us keep track of that item over time and the invoice that might receive. So any information. So right now the talk box, we don't know the amount yet, but it's something that we'd like to include. So we're going to put it in as a TBD and pick that it needs to be picked up by June. The personal emergency response system, we've included the vendor. The hearing aids, we've included a confirmation number as well as the vendor. This is information that can help the FMS tie out some of the information there. So as an invoice comes in. Adaptive computer equipment is one of Ernie's needs, and it ties out the person-centered plan, but we need to obtain more details. So we've included that as a line in the plan, but we also included a note that we need to update this in a future month. So right now, the current total for Assisted technology devices is $3,450. So if I had a really large item right now, like say it was another $5,000 item, I would get a warning saying that I've exceeded the limit. So I would know that I needed to reduce it. Okay, the next item that Ernie's going to use is assisted technology transmission. So item number 27, Ernie's going to do the PERS connectivity. It's a monthly invoice. It's going to arrive approximately around the 15th. I probably should include the vendor name just to be a little more specific. We aren't over the maximum. If I was, we could do this, see what happens. I do get an error message. So that information and the limits all come from the reference tab. So the information in here will be updated over time as those limits change. The next item is home accessibility adaptation, repairs, and replacements. This is an annual cost. So Arnie needs some repairs to the ramp. So that's included at an amount of $309. And then finally, we have our home accessibility adaptation. So there's three more items that I'm going to add here at the bottom. We need to widen the doorway. There's a ramp with some additional details that are TBD and some fire safety items that total $5,000. So now we have total spending for each of those four categories over here on the right hand side. We have our total fixed spending over on the right. This brings us to the If I scroll up, I'm looking to see if there are any red errors anywhere. I'm just making sure that everything looks okay. I'm also going to check to make sure that the total spending does not exceed the total authorized service dollars. So there would be red error messages if that were the case. So for example, if I typed in 80, you can see that all of a sudden flexible spending is incredibly negative. There's lots of red error messages everywhere. But I'm going to just put that right back to 8, so it's in line with what we planned. And before I end my plan, I'm just going to make sure I entered a date completed and the support broker name who completed the plan with a member, just for tracking purposes. Before I end today, I just want to make sure and mention when you're completing a spending plan, you notice that the needs are different from the PCP. It's important to go back to the case manager and revisit the PCP to make any necessary changes so that a member's needs and goals are met in the PCP as well as the spending plan. The spending plan is only supposed to reflect the PCP, and the member's needs and goals should be met through the PCP and then the spending plan. If you do have additional questions about the spending plan, you can download the instructions on the self-directed services page on the OATS website. I would take a few minutes to go through the steps to revise the spending plan. So we have our current spending plan. It goes out for an entire year. So the first step in doing this is right-clicking on the spending plan tab and go up to move or copy. And you'll select create a copy. And then I like to move it to the end, but that part is really up to you. And then I'll hit OK. This one's named Spending Plan 2. You can name it whatever you'd like. And it's going to start on July 1st, 2025. So we'll type that in. So now we have a 6-month spending plan for the second 6 months of the year. So this individual did not receive an updated authorization. If you did, you would update this. So we're going to move on. And when we first covered section 1 of the spending plan, we talked about items 13 are for rollover information. If you had a prior spending plan and you needed to carry over some information. So there's 2 sections to this. The first section is information from the prior plan goods and services accrual and the prior plan goods and services spent. So let's go back and obtain that information. So I'm going to go to the prior plan, and the first step is to cut it off on the day before. So we started our new plan on July 1st, so this one is going to end on June 30th. So now we have a 6-month plan, and I'm going down and I'm going to get these two fields, 13 and 13B. So the prompt says, use your FMS spending report or your prior plan, section 2, flexible spending summary, to complete 13 and 13B. So I don't have a spending plan report from the FMS, so I'm going down here and I'm going to go to this field, which says add to future spending items 13 and 13B. So the total accrual year to date is 10,000 and the goods and services spent year to date based on this plan is 5,345. I'm just going to select those. And I'm also looking, the goods and services spent year to date, it consists of all the items on here, right? So the total spent is the current amount. It includes all these. I can do a quick subtotal down here. It's the same amount. So I'm noticing that everything included on the plan is spent. If I had more up-to-date spending information, we can talk about what to do there. But so I copied those fields. I'm going to highlight both of them. I'm going to do a paste special and I'm going to paste the values. So we have our 10,000 for the accrual for the year. We have our 5,345 for spent for the year. Say I had an FMS report that had more accurate spending information. If an item came in underneath what we were anticipating, I could always enter that in here. But for now, I'm going to keep it at the 5,345. So the next item says, use your FMS spending report or prior spending plan to include the total flexible spending for item 13C or enter 0 if there is no prior spending plan. So now that we do have a prior spending plan for the year, I'm going to go back and I'm going to obtain the total flexible spending from this spending plan. So this $26,010.61, I'm going to copy it. Could also just write it down, but I like copying and pasting. I'm going to make sure and paste special and paste that value. It was $26,010.61. So now I have the prior spending. So let's talk about what this flexible spending is. So our total flexible spending is a combination of the flexible spending included from our prior plan, so that $26,010.61 that we just added, plus the total flexible spending that's included in the current plan, the $26,308.66. The funds remaining that are listed here are the total self-directed services authorized dollars, so for that 12-month period, and then it subtracts the total flexible spending for both the prior plan and the current plan to give you the funds remaining total. Our total flexible spending for this half of the year is $26,000. I like to go back and check at the old plan to make sure it's still in line. And look at that, they're very close. So this is when I would update whatever the member would like to do for the second half of the year. If they want to change any of the hourly rates for the employees, that those are updated if they hire new staff. But then you get down to what is available or not available for IDGS for the spending plan. You can see that it's negative and it says to reduce spending. Well, that's because we have not updated the spending information for the individual directed goods and services for this second half of the year. So we did pay for a lot of different things throughout the year. So we have two options. We could just select prior for all of this, so we keep track of all the spending. So everything would be selected as prior. You have your items on there, and then you can add some additional spending information below that as the member determines their plan for the second half of the year. Say they want to continue offering mileage, they could have another mileage line at a current expense, and they could say this one is $250. So as you're adding items, you'll see it at the goods and services spent current section. So that will be added to the plan. As long as you're in here, you can go down to the fixed spending items too and update any information that meets the member's needs.